Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Disney Antiquities and Collectibles. I am your co-host, Vince G, along with my amazing co-host, Matt McKim. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Are you ready?
Good.
We've
Yeah, I
got a
think
great
so.
guest. We've got a great guest.
I'm excited about this one, guys. If you know, we led up to this, and this is one that I have been waiting for a long, long time, and I'm truly excited because this man is truly iconic. I mean, you and your dad knew him, right? You guys
Yes,
talked about him in the house. Yeah.
yes. And
So
he couldn't be a nicer gentleman.
yeah,
Not only
exactly.
extremely talented, but the nicest gentleman.
Yeah, he's truly a gentleman, truly an icon, truly a Disney legend. If you guys haven't
Yes,
seen it, definitely check out An Animated Life, Floyd Norman. It's an incredible documentary. No holds barred. He's the real deal. He is incredible. So without further ado, let's bring on Mr. Floyd Norman.
yes.
Mr.
Hello,
Norman, how you
Floyd.
doing today, sir?
I am doing just fine, thank you.
Excellent.
Happy to
Excellent.
be happy to be here.
We're happy to
Glad
have
to
you
have you.
here.
Yeah, happy to have you. I am going to ask one question and tell me if you recognize this number. Six
Okay.
nine three 693 570. Do you know that number?
9-3. No, keep in mind I'm an old man now, so the memory is not what it
You know what?
memory
It's
is
funny
not what it
because
used to be.
no, I get that. That is your employee number when you started
Really?
Disney. 262656.
Oh, oh man. How did you know that?
Well,
I've got my sources. I've definitely got my sources.
cut him a little
Uh,
slack because he's been retired for 20 years.
he's been
I,
retired quite a long time.
I'm looking at some of
So,
my old Disney badges here,
There you
oh
go.
my
and
goodness.
I might have that badge here somewhere.
I bet
I'm
you
sure you
do.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start off with somebody who was very important in your family's life. Tell us
Okay.
about Esther Dubois.
Oh, my Aunt Esther.
Mm-hmm.
Aunt Esther was the one family member who made us aware of Santa Barbara, California. My aunt used to travel to the West Coast, to Southern California, and she wrote back to her family, my family to be one day, back in Natchez, Mississippi, and said, I found the promised land, Santa Barbara, California. This is where we should be. This is where we should live. And so, taking Esther's advice, the pretty much the entire Norman and Davis family left Mississippi and moved out to Southern California, particularly Santa Barbara, California.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Beautiful spot.
Wow.
Great
A
place
Yeah.
beautiful,
to
a
grow up.
beautiful place to grow up. Yeah, you bet. I was
Absolutely.
born in Santa Barbara back in 1935, and just spent all my kid years growing up in Santa Barbara. I would say it's got to be one of the nicest places on the earth. You know, it's got
Yeah.
everything. Orange groves, it's got mountains, it's got the seashore, and it's just a quiet community. And it has something else that a lot of people don't really think about. It's got movie stars.
Mm,
It's got
Yes.
show business personalities. It's
Yeah.
got musicians, composers, actors, writers, dancers, choreographers, screenwriters. They were all in Santa Barbara, California. So when any of us kids who were going through the school system ever spoke about going to Hollywood and becoming an actor or becoming a director or a screenwriter, if you were growing up anyplace else in the United States, your parents and your friends would have said you were out of your mind. But in Santa Barbara, because of its proximity to Hollywood, when you told somebody that you were going to go to Hollywood and get into the movie business, they would say, "Hey, that's a great idea." You know, I would literally eat in coffee shops, and there were movie actors having breakfast in the local Santa Barbara or Montecito coffee
yeah.
shops. And I remember one day getting yelled at by the actor Richard Widmark.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know if you know Richard Widmark, but he always played craze psychopathic killers,
Yes.
and so he was a scary dude. So to have Richard Widmark yell at you when you were a kid, you thought, wow, I got a movie star yelling at me. But yeah, but I've got a lot of fun stories like that, just encounters with movie actors,
Wow.
producers, directors, and because they all lived in Montecito or Santa Barbara, uh, you know, they didn't discourage us kids. They
Right.
encouraged us to
Wow.
get into this wonderful business, this entertainment business, where we make movies and TV shows. So
Right.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Walt Disney actually was involved with a writing club, and for the life of me, I can't think of the name of it, but they would ride up in the Santa Barbara mountains, I believe.
Yeah.
Had you
I
heard that
think you're
also?
right.
But I was just thinking too, speaking of horses, there's the polo field.
Yeah.
Is that Summerland actually, a little south?
Yeah. Right. It's just south of Santa Barbara, or yeah, south. Yeah, that would be Summerland.
Do you know if
Um,
Walt I'm sorry, go ahead.
Not quite Carpinteria, but
Yes.
Summerland, and that polo field is still there. It's still there today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Do you know if Walt ever played there, polo?
I'll bet he did, but
Yeah, I bet he
who
did
knows?
too.
Who knows? I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know my Disney history that well, but
Oh, no, no, no.
I do. But I do know that Walt was an avid polo player.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The your curiosity, from what I understand, was piqued when you went to the Fox Arlington Theater and saw Dumbo. Is that where it all basically started for you?
Yeah, that was one of the starting points. I'm sure there were many more, but Dumbo was certainly significant because my mom took me to see Dumbo one evening screening, which was unusual because
Mhm.
kids usually went to a matinee. But this time
Yes.
I went to a nighttime screening of Walt Disney's Dumbo,
Uh-huh.
and boy, did that film make an impression on me, especially the little the stork character who delivered
Mm,
the circus animals to all the babies to all of these circus
Yeah.
animals. And the stork was voiced by the actor Sterling Holloway,
Mhm.
yes.
who was a long time Disney voice actor. He did a lot of
Yeah.
films for Disney. And who knew that one day I would actually work with Sterling Holloway on the Jungle Book,
Jungle Book.
where
Yes.
where Sterling did the voice of Kaa the Python.
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing?
Yeah.
And your
truly
first Disney
amazing. Yeah,
movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, and I would end up years later working on the same film with that very same actor. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
You
A
know,
great
I
circle.
yeah, I was gonna stick with where we were going, but I will go with the Jungle Book because I was
Okay.
watching how you and the Sherman brothers came up with the Mowgli Ka scene.
Oh
I
yeah.
want to hear about that so much because that's incredible to me. That scene is amazing.
It's a beautiful film. One of my
It really
favorites.
is. Yeah, it
Well,
really is.
well, the credit for that sequence really goes to not so much because to myself or the Sherman brothers, although we were all part of it, but that really goes to Walt Disney's creativity. What happened was I had storyboarded that sequence along with my partner Vance Gary, who
Mhm.
was a veteran a Disney story guy. Vance and I shared an office up in Sea Wing, second floor of the animation building, and I had storyboarded this little sequence where uh, the tiger Shere Khan is looking for Mowgli. He questions Kaa the Python, and of course Kaa is trying to not let on that he's got Mowgli in his coils. So when eventually Shere Khan comes up and begins to question Kaa, he has to invent all of this stuff trying to distract the tiger and not let Shere Khan know that he's got Mowgli. And so I sort of storyboarded this little sequence and little funny things with a kid being half asleep. He's been sort of half hypnotized by Ka,
Yeah.
and he's up in the tree, and he's kind of like sleepwalking with a lot of funny things happening to him because he's basically, he's been hypnotized, sort of, and he's sort of sleepwalking. Well, when we pitched this sequence to Walt Disney, it was Walt who decided this sequence needed a song.
Hmm.
And of
Really?
course, Vance and I said, well, we don't have a song. And Walt said, not to worry. I'll have the Sherman Brothers write a song for you. And of course, that's exactly what they did. The song Trust in
Trusted.
Me was written by Bob and Richard Sherman to go with our sequence.
Mhm.
And it all came together really well.
Oh
But
yeah.
the inspiration for that sequence really goes back to Walt Disney himself.
Wow,
Wow.
Yeah.
that's
That's
incredible.
fun.
I'll never forget the eyes. The eyes had this look to them, to Mowgli. They were just
Yeah.
glazed over and
Twirling.
circular, twirling, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought
Fun
that,
stuff. That's right.
yeah, that was incredible.
It,
So,
it
all right,
really,
so let's go back a little bit. So
okay.
you're in Santa Barbara, and
Yeah.
at 17 years old, you decide you're going to come up to LA.
Yeah.
Is that a difficult decision? Is that something you want to do? Did you want to leave Santa Barbara?
Well, it was, I was really lucky in that one of the directors of our local boys club in Santa Barbara just happened to know somebody who worked at the Walt Disney Studio.
Okay.
So I got to give credit to a man named Gordon Wormel because it was Mr. Wormel who knew that I wanted to work for Walt Disney one day, and because he had a friend who worked at the Walt Disney Studio, he says, "I think I can get you in, for a visit
Yeah.
at the Walt Disney Studio." And so one Saturday morning, we drove down. We left Santa Barbara, drove that's not that far, but a 90-minute drive south. And we went down to Burbank and to the gates of the Walt Disney Studio, where I met with one of the personnel directors and showed them my portfolio. Uh, they seemed to be encouraged by what they saw,
Yeah.
and they had some advice for me. They said, we could give you a job now, but you're really not quite ready.
Hmm.
Mhm.
What we would recommend, if at all possible, and that's if you could enroll in art school, go to
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
learn, learn something, learn how to be an artist, learn the fundamentals of
Yeah.
drawing and painting and perspective and design and all of that stuff. Then come back and we'll talk about that job. So
Wow.
by taking the advice of the personnel director at the Disney Studio, I enrolled at Art Center College of Design, at that time located in Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
and became a full-time student. And I was at Art Center for a good nearly 3 years
Hmm.
when I received the phone call from the Walt Disney Studio uh, almost 3 years later, where they said, if you still want that job, uh, you know, come
Yeah.
on out to the Disney Studio Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And
Wow.
that's how it all began. Yeah.
So
Wow.
so what was your first day there like? I mean, you came in through the gates, you were met by
Yeah.
somebody, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, keep in mind the way things worked back in the old days, and it's really totally different from the way things work today. They would bring in what they would consider like a class of young men and women who they would give a 30-day training period. That meant we had a month to prove ourselves
Hmm.
to be worthy of a job at the Disney animation department. And so I do remember there were six of us guys in our class, and I think probably another six, five or six women in the second class. So they gave all of us 1 month to do in betweens, animation in betweens, and to prove that we could do this job. Those of us who qualified, who met the Disney studio requirements, were then given a full time job as an apprentice in betweener in Walt Disney's animation department. So
Wow.
Wow.
that's how my job began, and of course not just my job, but the job of many young men and women who also went through that 30-day training period and became Disney artists.
Wow.
Right. That's
Wow.
great. And so
Were
Yeah.
you
who did
feeling
you
the pressure? Were you
oh,
feeling the pressure those first 30 days? Were you under stress or were you comfortable?
I think we were so enjoying being at the Walt Disney Studio. There had to be some stress, but it certainly wasn't overbearing.
Yeah.
I think we were just delighted to be where we were. I mean, keep in mind, we were in the animation building where we could literally, on our break time, walk out into the hallway and walk up and down the corridors of the animation building, go into the offices of all the amazing Disney artists and watch them draw. And it was just such a marvelous place to be. You know, just to be there, just to be part of all this. It was more excitement than stress. It
Yeah.
was more fun. It was more fun than pressure.
Yeah.
And the good news is, all of us made it. We
wow,
all we all we all qualified. We all got
Wow.
that's
the job.
great.
We all became full-time Disney employees.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
your first film was Sleeping Beauty.
No, not really.
Oh.
Sleeping Beauty. No, Sleeping Beauty was considered a film for the veterans,
Yeah.
for
Ah,
those who had experience
Yeah.
and talent. Uh, all of us kids, what they gave us was the easy stuff, the simple stuff. So we worked on things like, the TV show Disneyland.
okay.
We worked on short animated cartoons, theatrical animated cartoons. We
Yes.
worked on the Disneyland TV show. Uh, I remember distinctly working on the Mickey Mouse Club,
Yes.
doing Jiminy Cricket.
Ah,
Remember those? Remember the "I'm no fool"? I'm no
yes.
Yes.
fool, no
I'm no
sirree.
fool.
I'm gonna live to be 23. I play safe for you and me, 'cause I'm no fool. Anyway, I worked on
Yep.
a bunch of Jiminy Cricket, I'm no fool things back then. And believe it or not, Jiminy Cricket was still at the Disney studio. The voice of Jiminy Cricket, Cliff
Oh,
Edwards, was
yes.
Mhm.
still there, and he was still doing the voice of the cricket.
Wow.
Many, many years later, after Pinocchio, Cliff Edwards was still around. They tell me that Cliff loved being at the Walt Disney Studio and didn't want to go home. You know, he was an old bachelor. He didn't have a wife or family to go home to, so the Disney Studio became his family.
Yeah.
I never
So
heard that.
yeah, so you would see Cliff Edwards just simply walking around the studio. He was
Ah,
always well dressed. He always wore a suit and a vest, so he was a very dapper dresser. But
yes.
yeah, he was still there doing the voice of Jiminy Cricket for the Mickey Mouse Club, and
Wow.
probably a few things for the Disneyland TV show as well.
Yeah.
Ukulele Ike was his nickname, right?
That's right, exactly it.
Yeah.
Ukulele. That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Ukulele, yeah, that's right.
He's buried just a few plots down from my great-grandfather, whose last name is also Edwards. It's kind of
Wow,
ironic. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
I don't
That's
know if it's
interesting.
true or not, but I had heard stories that it was the Walt Disney Studio that paid for his burial, his
Oh,
interment. Yeah, I,
Wow.
I heard that.
interesting.
He was kind of down on his luck, didn't have a lot of money, and the studio opted to pay for his gravesite.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
and
nice.
and, and it's a kind of thing Walt Disney would have done.
Yes.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I think Walt would have done that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Vince got, frozen there. Right, Vince, you with us?
Oh yeah, he did indeed.
Oh,
We
there he
were
is.
having some windstorms up there, and that was oh,
Yeah.
there we go. You're back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what's so, you've got this all going on. You're young. Who is your first or what is your first encounter with Walt Disney? How was that? Do you recall that first very meeting of Walt, or was
Oh,
that in a room?
didn't actually meet Walt Disney. It was indeed our first encounter. Uh, during that month-long training period, we were often told to go upstairs to one of the larger story rooms or screening rooms for a class. The Disney veterans would often give us lectures.
Yeah.
And I remember one morning we were told to go up to the third floor of the animation building. and wait in the hallway. So while all of us kids were out in the hallway waiting to be told to go into the room, we see this lone figure come walking down the hallway toward us. Well, that was Walt Disney. And it was
Wow.
the first time any of us kids had ever had an in-person view of Walt Disney. And as he came walking toward us, it was like watching Moses descend from the mount. It was quite something. So that was our first encounter with Walt Disney.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
And
Who
so,
who Go ahead,
I'm
Matt.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to ask you. So when you got started, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have your own office. So who were you
No.
in a space with? Who were the individuals? Do you
Well,
remember?
they would put all of us guys in a large room. Um, I remember being in 1F1, one of the
Okay.
first rooms I shared with a bunch of us, and they would refer to that room as the bullpen because it
Okay.
was
Yes.
mainly guys in that room. And I remember that first. I can tell you the people who were in that bullpen in 1F1. I can see there was Rick Gonzalez, um, Gene Fauché,
Uh,
John Leslie,
Wow.
uh, Tom Yakutis,
oh.
Tom Dejanay,
Yeah.
Jack Foster. A lot
Oh.
of these guys, stayed in the animation business
Mm-hmm.
for
Yes.
their entire career.
Yeah.
Um, Dave Michener, who was the nephew of the famous novelist James Michener,
Yeah.
Dave Michener became an animator, story artist, and eventually a director and a producer. Tom Yakutis um, became a director, screenwriter.
Oh.
Jack Foster was with us for many years. Jack Foster has a very interesting career path. He's an artist who came to Disney from the clergy.
Oh.
Jack was actually a pastor
Huh.
Really?
of a local church in the LA area. So here he was, and we called him Reverend Jack because he was he was a pastor, and so he came into the animation business along with the rest of us,
Yes.
and stayed in the business for many years,
Huh.
both
Wow.
Disney and other studios. So
Hanna-Barbera.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, he was at Hanna Barbera. Yeah.
Yeah. Did I take it him being a pastor was some good ribbing. You guys had some fun with them here and there, I take it.
Oh, I'm sure we did. Matter of fact, I know we did. Yeah, but
Well,
animation artists come from life. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
animators can be kind of a gruff group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but we're but we're
My
we're a good
brother,
group.
as you know, was an animator there too. So
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
bet, you bet. Yeah.
Um of the nine old men that you were able to, once you finally, cut your teeth and were, going along, of the nine old men,
Right.
were any of them just, did they take you on? Did they take you under their wing? Did they become kind of like a mentor to you? Was there any of that relationship with any of those men?
Yeah, but it didn't happen right away. I had
Yeah.
honestly been at the Disney studio for years before I even had the courage to actually speak to one of the nine old men.
Oh,
These guys were regarded as kind of like the gods of animation.
Yeah.
So going up to one of the nine old men and talking to them was a pretty daunting task, and it was literally years before I had the courage to actually talk to Milt Kahl or Frank Thomas or Ollie Johnson or Ward Kimball
Really.
or John Lonsberry or
huh.
Wolfgang Reiteman or Mark Davis. But eventually I knew all these guys. And it's kind of funny, the longer I was at the studio, the less foreboding they were. And
Yeah.
eventually I began to be good friends with a number of the nine old men. And I would spend time, for instance, having coffee on the Disney studio patio, at the commissary, having coffee with Frank Thomas
Wow.
and getting his advice. This didn't happen overnight. When I
Yeah.
was just a kid,
Yeah.
I would not even think about approaching
Hmm.
a big shot animator. But once I'd been there 10, 15, 20 years, it became a little easier to actually sit down and have a conversation with an Ollie Johnson or Ward Kimball. Ward Kimball was one of my favorites because I really admired Ward, and I became his assistant
Huh.
Wow.
for a time, and which was great because Ward was one of my favorite animators. He was
Really?
also
Great talent.
a musician and
Yes.
fronted the Firehouse Fireplace too. And I
Yes.
also played music, and so that meant Ward and I had something in common. We
Yeah.
Yes.
both came from sort of a musical background, so we loved animation, and we loved music, and of course we loved storytelling.
Yeah.
So
And
good
do you
heavens,
like trains?
I was at the. How's that again?
I'm sorry, Floyd. I was joking. Do you like trains also? That would have kind of topped it off. All three of those things stacked up.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny. I enjoyed trains, but I was not a train fanatic the
Yes.
way the way Ward was, and
Yes.
the way
Ollie.
Ollie Johnston was, and
Yes.
Yeah.
certainly I was not a train fanatic the way Walt Disney was. Those guys
Yes.
truly love trains. Another guy, a writer, Carl Fahlberg, also
Huh.
was a big. He loved locomotives and trains and knew all the history and all of the, all the minutia about locomotives and boxcars and trains and all of this stuff. I was not that bad, although I found trains to be romantic. I loved them. I thought
Yes.
they were great, but I was not a train nut as much as the other guy, and I probably couldn't afford it anyway. Having trains, that's a fairly expensive hobby.
It can be.
Another
Yeah.
guy who loves trains. Another guy who loves trains is John Lasseter.
Oh,
Oh,
John,
yeah.
yeah, John Lasseter loves.
Pixar.
He's a train nut. Yeah.
oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know he was a nut. I know he
Yeah.
liked
Oh
trains.
yeah.
I didn't know he was a
Oh
nut.
no. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He is. He truly is.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I believe John Lasseter bought Ollie Johnson's locomotive,
Oh,
Yeah.
the Anne Marie, and
Yeah.
okay.
he has that locomotive on his property up in
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Northern California. Yeah.
Wow.
I've got stories of friends who work for the railroad, and they say every now and
Uh,
then they'll see John Lasseter out there taking pictures of the trains, and
Oh,
he's talking to these guys because
oh
he's such a train fanatic.
wow.
yeah,
I didn't
That,
realize
that
it was
he's
that bad.
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well, it's a nice hobby if you can afford it.
Sure.
yeah.
Oh, the
If you
Yeah,
can
life
yeah.
afford
steamer
it,
part
yeah,
of it can be very pricey.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not cheap.
No.
Not cheap.
No.
Yeah.
Stick
So
with the
so
smaller scale.
yeah. So you're working at Disney. You're working on all these different movies. In the middle of 101 Dalmatians, a movie that you're working
Yeah.
on, you get drafted. What happened there? What was that like?
Well, we had just completed Sleeping Beauty. I
Mm-hmm.
believe the year was probably late 1958.
Uh-huh.
We were supposed to move on to our next feature film, which was the Sword in the Stone. Yeah, Sword in the
Okay.
Stone. Bill Pete had already started storyboarding the Sword in the Stone, which was going to be the feature film that would follow Sleeping Beauty. At the last minute, Walt Disney told Bill Pete, stop what you're doing. We're going to do this dog movie next. Well, that dog movie was um, based upon a novel by Dodie Smith called
Mhm.
The 101 Dalmatians,
Yeah.
and Walt thought this children's story would be just the perfect thing for an animated feature film.
Yeah.
So we immediately dropped all we were doing on Sword in the Stone and immediately began drawing Dalmatian dogs. And I, along with everybody else, began doing early design work on Dalmatians.
Hmm.
Mm.
Before I had even gotten into the movie, before the movie had even moved into production, I found myself suddenly drafted into the United States military.
Mm.
Wow.
And that happened in those days because the draft was still active.
Yeah.
So any any of us young men of the right age could easily have been drafted into the armed forces.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
just a bit of information that we just found out from Floyd the other day, he was in the same unit as Matt's father, Sam McKim, which was pretty
Yes.
interesting.
that's
How did you
that's
find that
right.
out, Floyd? How did you were you guys talking about that?
It wasn't until years later, and I was in Sam's office on the third floor of the animation building, and Sam McKim did a lot of storyboarding for Disney's live action films, and it's a kind of thing. It really comes in handy.
Yeah.
And Walt knew the value of a good storyboard. It really helped you, streamline things and helped you really focus when you're shooting the film. And Sam was particularly good at doing these storyboards for live action. Well, during one of our visits, and I don't know if I saw a bit of memorabilia, a hat or a jacket or whatever, but I saw the emblem of the First Cavalry Division. And I had been in the First Cav Division in Korea back in
Yeah.
the 50s. And I wondered, I asked Sam, were, were you ever in the First Cavalry Division in Korea? And sure enough, he was. He
Yeah.
was. We were in the same unit.
Isn't
Of
that
course,
amazing?
at the time, I had no idea that Sam McKim was an officer,
Yeah.
in the first Cavalry Division. But lo and behold, this was something we both had in common. We had both
That's
gone off.
amazing.
We had both gone off to war and come back years later to the Walt Disney Studio and resumed our career
Yeah.
as filmmakers.
Right.
So you never know. You never
You
know.
never know.
Never know.
Such a
Yeah.
Yeah,
small world, just
it
by
Who
is.
you're working next
happenstance.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's incredible. I mean,
yeah.
all these things. So you're back and you're working again. And what what is your most favorite? What's the favorite character of yours that you really enjoy working on at Disney so far? What has been your favorite that you've worked on that you've really loved?
Yeah, people often ask me that. And when you think about all the Disney characters, and there's so many of them, and
Yeah.
I probably worked on any number of Disney characters, the ones that appeared in short films, the ones that appeared in feature films. When you're making these films, when you're telling these stories, it's just a joy to to be a part of this Disney magic. So it is really difficult to choose a favorite. I will tell you that Mickey Mouse has always been a favorite of mine. And here's how that story goes. When I was a little kid growing up in Santa Barbara, I would sit in the back seat of my dad's car and
Mhm.
I would read Mickey Mouse Adventures. You know, long, lazy summer afternoons. I would be in the back seat of my dad's car with my Disney comics and stories, reading these wonderful stories about Mickey Mouse and all of the amazing adventures Mickey went on,
Yeah.
and I so enjoyed that as a kid. Well, many, many years later, I found myself taking a break from Disney animation, and I ended up for a decade working in Disney publishing. And guess what I was doing in Disney publishing? I was writing Mickey Mouse stories.
That's
So
amazing.
so here my childhood joy of reading these marvelous adventures with Mickey. Here I was writing my own stories using Walt's, you know, famous mouse
Yeah.
and sending Mickey Mouse off to deserted islands and strange places and having Mickey go on all these marvelous adventures. And here I was, the writer crafting the story. So,
Wow.
it is a child's dream come true.
Yeah.
Sure.
Imagine enjoying something as a kid and then having the opportunity to do it as your profession, in real life.
Yes.
Uh, it doesn't get much better than that. So I would
No.
have to say, if I had to choose a character that really gave me a lot of joy, it would be Mickey Mouse.
Wow. and I'd heard that something kind of like that. So I saw you at the barn, and when you
Yeah,
signed your name, you drew a quick picture of Mickey Mouse. And I knew
yeah,
then, I was like,
yeah,
that was the pinnacle for me. I'm like, I got Floyd Norman's autograph with Mickey Mouse. I
yeah.
was like,
With
I'm done.
with
That's
Mickey
it.
Mouse.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
Well,
that was so
you know,
exciting.
during the last couple of years, during the COVID thing that sent all of us home, I actually had the opportunity to work with a small crew
Hmm.
on a feature length documentary called Mickey: The Story of a Mouse, and
Yes.
Oh, great.
it was an examination of Mickey, all
Oh,
things Mickey,
yeah.
and Mickey's career, all the way from Steamboat Willie to present day.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to work on this documentary and to do some voiceover. A lot of the voiceover stuff I recorded at home because none of us on our team could go into the Disney studio
Yeah.
during
Oh,
COVID. We were all
oh,
sent
right.
home. We all had to work remotely, so
Yeah.
I had to work with my producer, with my directors, and when I was recording from my home studio. I would record those files, send them off electronically to the Disney studio, where they would then be cut into the film. So it proved that we could still tell stories, we could still make movies, we could still do it, even if we weren't at the studio. We could
Yeah.
still work together from home. So I think what COVID did for us, it did show us that we could continue to work,
Yeah.
even with a disaster like COVID, sending everybody packing. All of us had to go home. There was nobody at the studio. When you would go to the Disney studio, it was like it was vacant. It was deserted. There was nobody there, and
Wow.
yet we were able to continue making our film, even though we didn't see each other for at least 2 years. So when we finally got together,
Yeah.
we had a kind of like a sneak preview of the film at South by Southwest in
Oh,
Austin, Texas. That was the first time I had seen my
Hmm.
film crew in over 2 years. So
wow.
it was not only
Wow.
a celebration of the finished film, but a celebration of the film team finally getting together again after 2 years of not seeing each other in person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was quite something. Yeah.
It's
Wow.
exciting.
Yeah. I was gonna say that must have been, just something to bring you all back together and to prove that, you know what, you guys could just
It
about
was.
overcome anything. So
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
working
Well,
at the
it did.
studio. Go ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
going to say it it did prove that we could continue to work, whether we were at the studio or at home. We could still get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're working at the studio, everything's going great.
Mhm.
1966, Walt passes away. What goes through your
Yeah.
mind? What are you thinking when Walt passes? What's going on at the studio?
Well, that was a traumatic time, especially coming onto the Jungle Book in 1965, 1966, and having absolutely no idea how ill Walt Disney was.
Yeah.
Um, None of us had any idea. I think that Hazel, Walt's nurse at the Disney studio, I think Hazel was aware, but none of us who worked with Walt on the Jungle Book had any idea because Walt seemed the same to us. If you were to ask me, did Walt show any signs of illness? Did Walt show any signs of slowing down? Did he show any signs of, not being with it, not being all together? And no, Walt Disney worked with the same energy and enthusiasm he did on any normal day. So none of us had any idea that Walt was as sick as he was. So when he passed away in December, late 1966, believe you me, it was a total shock to all of us
Yeah.
because none of us had any idea. So losing Walt in December of 1966 it's got to be the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to the Disney studio. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, we have gone through trauma before the Second World War, the labor action in the early 40s, a
Yeah.
lot of financial setbacks, a lot of hardships, a lot of wondering if the studio was even going to survive. Disney made it through all of those tough times. But when Walt Disney passed away, this had to be the biggest challenge of all. And there
Yeah.
was nothing quite like that. I tell people it was the only time you would see that day that when the word came out. It was a Friday afternoon. Walt passed away Friday morning,
Hmm.
but the family did not allow the word of his passing to get out to the press until late Friday afternoon. So even we at the Disney studio had no idea that Walt had passed away early that morning. So when the word finally got out Friday afternoon, man, oh man, that hit like a ton of bricks. It was like unbelievable,
Wow.
unbelievable. We could
Wow.
not believe when the word came to us and said Walt Disney has died, Walt Disney has passed away. It was like, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Walt
Yeah.
Right.
Disney dead?
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. How could that be?
Yeah.
So,
And
and I literally saw grown men in tears headed for the parking lot. They got up from their desks, walked out to the parking lot, got in their car, and drove home. And I would say the Disney studio was traumatized for at least a decade after the
mm,
loss of Walt Disney. Yeah, there was just nothing quite like that. So yeah, it was a very traumatic time, and yet the Disney studio managed to pull itself together
Yeah.
and began doing the work as Walt would have wanted us to do. And
Yeah.
we went
sure.
back to building theme park attractions, making animated films, and the Disney studio continues to this day. It's not the same studio. There's no doubt about that. It's not
Yeah.
the same studio that Walt ran back in the '60s. But
Right.
things change. Nothing stays the same.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of life. Things
And
Yeah.
change, and
I
so
know over in
yeah.
Imagineering that my dad was saying that, they didn't know what was gonna happen. They're working on
Hmm.
Florida, working
Yeah,
on Epcot, and they
yeah,
had no clue, and it was Roy O., his Walt's brother, that pulled everyone together and said, "Listen, we're gonna continue with my brother's dreams here, we're gonna do it." So,
yeah,
but up until that point, nobody knew the direction the company was gonna go.
Wow.
yeah. It is amazing when you look back, and to think that Roy O. Disney was Walt's older brother, not younger brother. Roy
Correct.
was older, and
Yes.
he had already planned to retire, and this work was, it had to be fairly stressful on
Oh,
Yeah.
Roy,
sure.
and yet he had made a promise to his younger brother Walt that he would make sure that Walt Disney World was completed, that it opened on schedule, and Roy kept that promise to Walt. And when Disneyland, or not Disneyland, but when Walt Disney World finally opened in Orlando, it was only, I believe, a few weeks after that that Roy O. Disney passed away. After
Wow.
he had kept his promise to Walt, then he felt he was kind of free of that obligation. He had done what Walt wanted him to do. He opened Walt Disney World, and so now it was
He could
time
rest.
for Roy to leave. Yeah,
Yes.
He could
time for him
rest.
to rest.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
And, I was gonna say too, it's kind of interesting, you mentioning I had never heard that the family kept, Walt's passing, private until
Yeah,
a little bit later in the day. But what's
that's
really
right.
interesting is it was literally across the street from the Walt Disney Studios where Walt passed
Yeah,
away. We're
isn't that
talking
amazing? Yeah,
hundreds of yards away,
yeah,
you know?
right across the street, and St.
Yes.
Joseph's Hospital, and of course nobody knew.
No.
Walt passed
Interesting.
away early that morning. His son-in-law, Ron Miller, told me all about it because Ron was there, and he said that the last person to speak to Walt that morning was his older brother Roy, and
Ah,
even Ron didn't have a chance to say goodbye
mm,
because Walt wanted to he wanted to talk to his older brother. He had I think Walt knew,
Business.
and he had some business to pass on, and he knew no
Yes.
better person than his older brother Roy to get
Yes.
this information too. So yeah, yeah,
Wow.
and
Amazing. Huh?
an amazing time,
Yeah.
Yes.
and that 10 years or so, I was away from the Disney studio probably for a good 10 years before I went back. Uh, Maybe not that long, because I did go back to work on Bed Knobs and Broomsticks,
Ah,
and that
Mm.
was in the late '60s or early '70s.
yes.
And
Yeah.
I did return to animate on the feature film Robin Hood,
Oh, right.
and
Yeah.
I think
Another great one.
Robin Hood was 1971. So I did
Yeah.
Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, followed by Robin Hood, and um, and then I left again because I was doing other things. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
They were always talking about Disney animation dying, and they were always predicting the death of
Mm.
Disney animation. But Disney animation never died. It appeared to die on occasion, but it would always keep coming back. And
Revive.
so
It
yeah,
reinvented
it would
itself.
always
It
it
reinvented
would
itself
always
every time.
yeah, it would always reinvent itself. And I remember, good heavens, I remember being around when they were working on the Little Mermaid. I remember being asked if I wanted to come work on the Lion King at the time. Now, at that
Wow.
time, I had left animation. I had to be clear. It wasn't that I didn't
Yeah.
want to work on these films, but I had taken a break from Disney animation, and I was working literally across the street from the animation building, working in the Roy O. Disney building at Disney Publishing. So I was still doing a Disney job, just working in a different medium. I was working on books and magazines and comics and that kind of thing. And I was enjoying myself, having such a good time writing this material. Again, Mickey Mouse was part of the stuff I was writing. I was having such a good time writing all of this Disney material. I really didn't want to go back to animation because I was enjoying myself
Sure.
Yeah.
working on the books, comics, magazines, and the daily newspaper comic strip. I wrote Mickey Mouse for at least 5 or 6 years
Wow.
for King Feature Syndicate. It was a nationally syndicated comic strip,
Yeah.
and I did that job for about 5 or 6 years. And I didn't return to animation probably until the early '90s, when
Okay.
the contract with King Feature Syndicate and the Walt Disney Company ran out, and so they were no longer publishing the Mickey Mouse comic strip. And at that point, and Disney was doing some really interesting things with animation. They had done Beauty and the Beast and the Little
Yeah.
Mermaid and the Lion King.
Lion King.
And
Yeah.
I thought if there was ever a time to go back to animation, this was that time. So
You
I
were.
decided, yeah,
I'm sorry. No, I was just
no,
gonna
go ahead.
say. So you're looking at all this new technology and you're learning this
Yeah,
technology. You had a chance
yeah.
to work on Toy Story, but you decided to come back for Toy Story 2. Is that correct?
Well, that's really interesting. I had the opportunity to one of the great guys up at Pixar, sadly, who is no longer with us, Joe Ramp, who
Yeah.
was tragically killed in an auto accident. Joe Ramp tried to get me to come up to Pixar to work on Toy Story, which is ironic that I turned down this classic uh, feature animated film. But I had already made a commitment to Disney to work on The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So
Yes.
I felt I had an obligation to Disney, and I needed to keep that. Uh, Once I had completed work on The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the film that followed that was Mulan, and I worked on
Mm.
Mulan as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, then I learned that Pixar was going to do a sequel to Toy Story, Toy Story 2. And so once again, I had an offer to go up north to the Bay Area to work with Pixar on Toy Story 2. And I did accept that invitation. And I literally packed my bags and I moved up north to San Rafael where I spent the next 3 years working on
Wow.
Toy Story 2 and Monsters Incorporated. So I had the
Great.
opportunity to do, to kind of like to live in both worlds, the old world of hand drawn, traditionally animated films,
Yeah.
and to do a couple of digital films up at Pixar. But
Wow.
That's
again,
amazing.
the medium doesn't really matter all that much. Good storytelling,
Yes.
that's what really matters, and making a good film, that's what really counts.
Yeah.
And
So I had the opportunity to work on what I consider two of my favorite films, Toy Story 2 and Monsters Incorporated, and had a grand old time uh, working up north at Pixar Animation Studios.
okay.
I knew a lot of the guys anyway because I knew them when they were still students at Cal Arts down here in Southern California. So a lot of the young men and women I had already met and known from earlier times. So yeah,
Yeah.
I had a I've been really lucky to been able to work on a lot of really choice projects, a lot of really good films,
Oh,
and I've been
absolutely.
really quite lucky to have had such a lengthy career. A lot of people, didn't last. I remember
Mm.
after Sleepy Beauty wrapped up way back in 1959, a lot of the people left the business and never worked in animation
Mm.
again. And then after
Really?
101 Dalmatians, there was another massive layoff, and a lot of animation artists left the business and never worked for Disney again. And I've been
Hmm.
Wow.
lucky enough to continue to keep on rolling, where I've gone from one Disney project to the next, one Pixar film to the next, and always managed to stay involved, to stay engaged, and to have this relationship with Disney, with Pixar,
Yeah.
and it's just been a great relationship. And I've
Oh,
enjoyed every
absolutely.
minute of it. Yeah,
But you did go outside of Disney. I mean,
yeah,
you went to Hanna-Barbera, and you'll have to
yeah.
share a
Well,
little bit about that. But also, very excitingly,
yeah,
you joined forces with Leo
yeah,
Sullivan with
Leo.
Vignette Films,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
And you also created, now I
yeah.
don't know
That's
how
right.
much
Yeah,
later, the Afro Kids.
Oh yeah.
So maybe you can share a little bit about
yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's exciting.
yeah. I met a couple of guys. Oddly enough, they were former Los Angeles policemen. Uh,
Ah,
Dick Allen, who was a cop, and Norman Edlin, who was also a Los Angeles policeman. And
Hmm.
we joined with them to form a company called Vignette Films Incorporated, where um, we just wanted to start our own studio. And that was basically it. We wanted to start
and
our own
and what
studio,
year
do
was
our own
that?
thing.
I'm sorry, no, Floyd, what year was that?
This had to be 1967, probably.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in the 1960s, probably 1967, 68. And we did
okay.
a lot of interesting things. So we worked for Oscar Brown Jr. We worked for Bill Cosby. We worked on the
Yes,
Fat Albert special.
love that.
We designed the Soul Train logo
Oh,
because
that's
Yes.
right.
Soul Train
Yes.
was a very popular TV show, and we did
Yes,
Yes.
the animated logo for Soul Train.
I forgot about
So
that.
yeah, so we had a quite an active time. So like I said,
Yes,
we tried a little bit of everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Vince and I grew up watching Fat Albert,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
we have a
Fat
connection there.
Albert,
Oh
Fat
yeah,
Albert, Soul Train, Super Friends. Your
oh yeah,
name is in everything. I mean, literally
yeah,
everything as far as I can remember
Scooby-Doo,
going back. Yeah.
Flintstones, with
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everything. You've had such an
Oh, you bet.
illustrious career. Yeah.
Oh, let
Yeah,
me
yeah.
let me ask,
I've just been lucky. I've been lucky.
right
Lucky.
place at the
Yeah.
right time, huh?
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
as far
Right
as
place at the right time.
Yeah.
yes. Now,
Yeah.
as far as your good buddy, Willie Ito, now
Yeah,
Willie also started early at Disney and then went to
yeah.
Hanna-Barbera and spent quite a bit of time. Now, did you know him at Disney, or was it not until Hanna-Barbera, or maybe some other place?
I knew Willie a little bit at Disney, but I
Okay.
think by the time I got to Disney, Willie, I think, had already moved on, and I believe he went to work for Bob Clampett.
Oh,
Bob
yes.
Clampett, yeah,
Oh,
the creator of Beanie and Cecil.
yeah.
Bob Clampett had started his own studio in Hollywood, and Willie went to work for Bob Clampett.
That's
Following
right.
Clampett, Willie went to work for Hanna-Barbera, and
Yeah.
as one of the layout leads at Hanna-Barbera. Excuse me, kind of hoarse here. But anyway, so when I left Disney around 1972, toward the end of Robin Hood, I went to join Willie over at Hanna-Barbera, and I became part of Willie Ito's layout crew on Josie and the Pussycats.
Oh, right. Right. Another one we grew up
And
with.
of course, and then after that, I went on to any number of Hanna-Barbera shows, the Flintstones, Scooby Doo, the
Yes.
Smurfs, uh,
Oh, right.
more shows than I could even remember. I went, because every season you did a batch of new shows. So
Yeah.
every season you would do like 5 or 6 brand new animated TV shows.
Yes.
So I was always hopping from one show to the next. The one show that did remain a constant was Scooby Doo.
Oh,
No
Scooby-Doo.
matter what, no
okay.
matter what we did, Scooby
Mhm.
Doo was always there.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
simply would not go away.
Casey Kasem. Casey Kasem kept it going strong. I'm telling you.
He,
Oh,
he sure did.
Yeah.
He sure did. Yeah.
So
and that's a
Try-
different pace than Disney Studios, obviously, for television.
yeah,
So you guys were hopping.
yeah. You
Yeah.
guys are
Well,
moving.
it was a different world, and for those
Yes.
who had difficulty adjusting, you had to realize that it was two totally different kinds of filmmaking.
Yes.
At Disney, you had the time and the money to lavish attention to detail on
Yes.
every production. At
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera, you were constantly knocking stuff out for Saturday morning TV. So
Yeah.
that meant you didn't have the time, you
Correct.
didn't have the money, you just had a job that had to get done. So you learned to work according to what studio you were being employed. So
Yes.
at Disney, you took your time and you lavished your attention on the work you were doing. At Hanna Barbera, you had to knock it out,
Yes.
and I do mean knock it out because
Yes.
Yeah.
it had to get done. It
Yes.
simply had to get done on time and on budget, and you had precious little of both. And
Yeah.
so, but you learn to deal with it. You learn to work with it. And I can honestly say I had as much fun at Hanna Barbera as I did at Disney. The work we were
Sure.
doing certainly does not compare in any way to the work we were doing at Disney. But for what it was, for what we had to do, in the time we had, with the budget we had, you know, we got it done,
But
Yeah.
and
you
we
had
had a
fun
good time.
people. Excuse
Yeah.
me.
Oh yeah, oh a lot of fun people.
Yes.
You bet. I mean, part of the joy of this job is working with the talented, but also some of the funniest people in the world. Because you were like working in a madhouse.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
And to give credit to our bosses, they let us be crazy.
Yes.
really, Hanna and
Oh, yes.
Barbera.
Yeah,
That's where the
And
creativity
yeah,
comes from.
yeah, you were working
that's
with
right.
Iwo Takamoto. Another
Mm.
another legend, Iwo Takamoto. Was
Yeah,
he a
yeah.
taskmaster or was he just a jokester? What kind of person was he?
Uh, Mr. Takamoto was the very opposite of Willie Ito. Willie Will, Willie Ito was a fun guy who loved having a good time, and Iwo Takamoto was all nuts and bolts business. He was very. I'm not saying he was a bad guy, but he certainly
Right.
was not a guy full of humor. He
Yeah.
took life and he took his job. He took his job very seriously. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm sure he did.
yeah,
I am definitely sure he
right.
did. You know,
Very,
I
very seriously.
you know, Floyd, we're
Yeah,
running on the hour thing, and I know you've got things you got to do. Um, I wanted to ask you one more thing, and I'm hoping we can
you
bring
bet.
you back for maybe a part two in the future. But There is
That would be
an expression that I'm hearing a lot of from people, and it's called
Yeah.
floidering. Can you explain what floidering is?
Yeah, a talented young animator named Avi Tuckman, who works at the Disney studio, um, he noticed that he would see me loitering around the Disney studio because that's what I would do. I would loiter because that's that's how you find out what's going on. You loiter.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
by adding my name to the expression loitering, I was now floitering. And so Albie came up with that expression that if you hang around the Disney studio and you're nosy and you butt your head in to maybe where you shouldn't be, and you loiter, what you're really doing is you're not just loitering, you're floitering because
yes.
you're doing what I do. And I made it a point from the moment I started at the Disney studio. I was so curious. I wanted to know everything that was going on. I wanted to know who was doing what,
Yeah,
who was working on what, and what was Walt going to come up with next. So I
yeah,
was a real advocate of loitering, which eventually became floitering because I wanted to know what was going on. So it just
That's
yeah,
means
great.
you're curious. Yeah, it just means
yeah.
you're very, very curious. Yeah.
But,
I love that.
Walt appreciated that, though, and it's what I used to call, cross-pollinating, and it's
Yeah.
going and I used to do it myself, where you would go and meet new people and
Yeah.
find out what they're working on, what their backgrounds were, and
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
myself, as a production designer at Imagineering, I'd have issues and problems that I'd have to come up with a solution,
Yeah.
and I would kinda go through my mental Rolodex and go, "You know what? I need to go talk to so and so because 'cause they've
Yeah.
got this background," and
That's
so
right. That's
it
right.
it comes in handy, is what I
Yeah.
used to call cross-pollinating.
You bet. And Matt, I must also say that's how I met your dad. I
Ah,
met Sam McKim because I would loiter around the building, see who was doing what, and I walked into this large room filled with storyboards, beautifully drawn storyboards, and
oh.
they were being done by a guy named Sam McKim. And I met Sam, and the two of us became fast friends. Certainly, once we
Yes,
found out we had served in the same military unit in Korea. So
right.
you if you don't loiter, if you don't get around, you're going to miss meeting a lot of fascinating people.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah,
Yeah,
and I have to say, and maybe I should have started this out with our interview with you, that Floyd,
yeah.
my dad spoke so highly of you that when I
Oh,
finally met you, you
yeah.
lived up to that,
wow.
Oh, well,
you're such a gentleman, Floyd.
that's high praise indeed because I so admired Sam McKim.
Oh, thank you.
Not just his brilliant artwork, but just as a person, he was just such a genuine human being,
Oh,
and just
thank you.
such a nice guy. And
He
he was always open and willing to share
oh,
and
yeah,
willing to, yeah, and that means a lot. I think the Walt Disney Studio was filled with people like that, people
mm.
who were very giving, very sharing, very willing to be, to be gracious and to pass on what they had learned to the next generation.
Well, you
Yeah,
had to rely on people, to get a
Yeah,
job done. So
you bet.
if you didn't know and trust these individuals, the
Yeah,
project's gonna fall flat on its face.
that's
So
right.
it was important. But my dad
You bet.
admired you very much also, Floyd.
yeah,
Oh
You
well, that's
very much so.
uh, thank you for that. I truly appreciate that. Coming from Sam, that means a lot to
Oh,
me,
yeah,
a whole lot.
yeah,
well,
yeah,
I'm glad for that, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a question here from, he couldn't get on to ask this question, but, Bob Burdine was wondering, if you had worked with Jerry Eisenberg and Tony Benedict.
I worked with both
Yes,
Jerry Eisenberg and Tony Benedict, not at Disney, but at
no,
Hanna Barbera.
at
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera.
Wait! I have to make a correction. I did work with Tony Benedict at Disney
Oh,
and Hanna Barbera.
okay,
So
Wow.
at both studios, yeah, at both places, I worked with Tony. Yeah,
okay. And with
yeah.
Tony at Disney, what did you work on? Do you remember?
I think we were on, well, initially the Disneyland TV show, and then eventually on Sleeping Beauty.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Oh,
And then at Hanna-Barbera, which would have been
And then
multiple
at Hanna,
projects. Yes.
yeah, and then at Hanna-Barbera. I didn't get to Hanna-Barbera until the 70s, but
Correct.
Tony was already there. He beat me there because I stayed on to work on the next feature film, which was Sword in the Stone, and eventually Mary Poppins.
wow.
And then I eventually got to Hanna-Barbera in the early 70s when I went
Okay.
to work for Willie Ito on Josie and the Pussycats.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's amazing. That's
Well,
amazing.
yeah, fun times.
Floyd, we know you've got a busy schedule, and we appreciate this hour that you've given us so much.
Yes.
Is there any way in the future, if your schedule permits, we could bring you back for a part 2? Because there's so many more things that we'd love to talk to you about if you have the time.
Oh, there's a lot more to talk about. You can be sure when it comes to the Walt Disney Studio. I could go on and on,
Yeah.
and we might just save this for another time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
We would love that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very much.
sounds good. Sounds
All
like
right.
fun.
Thank you for
Thank you,
today,
Floyd.
Floyd. Yeah, we
You
appreciate
bet.
it so much.
You bet.
Again,
Great,
guys,
great time to sit down with you.
yeah, an animated life. You have to see this. You have to enjoy Floyd, who he
Yes.
is, what he's about. A true gentleman, an icon, a legend. Thank you, Floyd. You have
Absolutely.
an amazing Sunday, and we will talk to you again
bet.
soon.
You
Take
bet.
care.
Thank you, my friend.
All right,
Okay.
everybody. Have a
Bye.
great Sunday, and we'll see you
Bye-bye.
next time on Disney Antiquities and Collectibles. Bye-bye.
Thank you.